Welcome, friends. This interview comes from a long time ago, when I realized who Chard was. I read the book of Carcassonne in 2021, and for me, Chard was, at that time, a famous player in my world of Carcassonne. A couple of years later, I tried to do this meeting with Dan from July to September this year, 2023. In the end, the whole conversation you will find behind the opening song in this channel took place before Herne 2023, the World Championship in Germany. The reason for publishing it now, in November 2023, is part of a long story, but the most important thing is that Chard and I didn't know what would happen at the World Cup a few days later. Enjoy this interview with one of the most famous and biggest contributors to Carcassonne today.
Welcome to Meeple Podcast, Season 4.
Welcome back to Meeple Podcast. With us, a man who is very famous in the Carcassonne world. He is the co-author of the Book of Carcassonne with Steve D, captain of Team UK, an expert player on BGA and great collaborator of the WTCOC. He is also the co-owner of Carcassonne Central, the most important forum about Carcassonne around the world. We are talking about Chard, danisthirty on BGA. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
I have a lot of questions. Dan, I hope you can answer all of them.
I'll certainly do my best, but I can't promise anything.
I'd like to ask you a question that I ask most of the time to the people I have on the Sound channel. How did you get to know about the game? And how are you still playing after so many years?
So, it all started for me back in 2012 when my wife Becky bought the base game for me as a birthday present. Neither of us played board games then, so I had no idea what it was and thought it was some kind of jigsaw puzzle. But I was hooked almost as soon as I'd realised that it was a game, and got very excited when I discovered that there were expansions for it that could be added to make the game bigger and more complicated. I didn't know what I was getting myself into then, but I do wonder if my wife would still have bought it for me if she had known then how much it would take over my life. As for how I'm still playing it, I don't know. I keep telling myself that I'm going to slow down and start giving up some of my Carcassonne responsibilities, but then I think of something else I'd like to do and it all begins again.
I guess you never thought you would have to write a book about your favorite game, or that you could be the captain of Team UK when the WTCOC was created in 2020.
Absolutely not. I had no idea because I never really set out to make any of those things happen. I've been very lucky with most of the initiatives that I've been involved in that I always seem to be in the right place at the right time and would never turn down the opportunity to share my passion for Carcassonne with as many people as possible or to help others do the same. It's really been quite a privilege and I've loved where it's taken me.
Most of the international players level has grown thanks to BGA and the online competition. But what do you think about it, and what do you consider about your current level in Carcassonne?
I have kind of mixed feelings about this. I'm a huge fan of BGA and how it's become the favourite place for players of all levels to play Carcassonne online. I'm lucky to be able to call many of these players my friends, and I've seen some great collaborations grow out of similar friendships between members of various different international Carcassonne organisations working together. being able to watch Carcassonne via live YouTube streams with commentary, and occasionally even being featured on these or joining the commentary team, is something I never dreamed of before 2020. But I also think that the higher level of competition has meant that some players are more willing to find ways to give themselves an advantage in order to stand out. There are various scripts that exist that will do all the tile counting for players who can't do it themselves, and there are other methods that can help to boost individuals through the rankings. It makes things very uneven, which can be frustrating for players like me who insist on playing honestly, even when this might put us at a disadvantage. As for my current form, it's not great. With one exception, I've placed inside the top 4 of every in-person UK Carcassonne Championship since 2018, but online 2023 has been a terrible year for my elo.
Tell us about the Team UK and tell us a bit about its Chard's history, considering that it comes from the appearance of the WTCOC only 4 editions ago.
So I was invited to create a UK team for the first WTCOC because I was probably the most active UK player on BGA at the time, and I got to know a few of the guys who were organising the competition. Getting the team together was actually quite easy, as I was already friends with at least 3 former UK champions and knew several other UK players from Carcassonne Central. The only difficulty was that most of them were quite new to BGA at the time, so it took a little while for everyone to become familiar with it at first. Others like Chris Wallace and Matt Tucker, who went on to win the UK Championships in 2022 and 2023 respectively, were players who we spotted along the way and persuaded to join the team. I'm actually very proud of the UK team and everything we've achieved so far. We don't have a single star player like some teams, but have a high standard across the team, so there's never an easy duel for our opponents. But this aside, I'm most proud of how supportive everyone is of each other and our team spirit that is often tested but never broken. Getting together with everyone at the UK Games Expo each year often feels more like a party than a Carcassonne competition, and I couldn't be happier about the role that I've played in helping that to come together.
Speaking about WTCOC and ETCOC, I asked you about Carcassonne.cat. What do you want to say?
The Carcassonne universe is made up of collections of Carcassonne players and fans from all over the world working together because they love Carcassonne, and I can honestly say that Carcassonne.cat has made one of the biggest contributions of any group to this. 2020 was a crazy year for pretty much everyone on the planet. It was scary and difficult for most of us in lots of different ways, but it was also very boring having to spend so much time at home and not being able to go out to take part in social activities. I'm very grateful that BGA was there for the millions of gamers who went online to play board games when they were no longer able to play them in person with their friends. The WTCOC was just an idea that probably seemed impossible at first, but Carcassonne.cat worked so hard to make it happen, and it was so worth it. It really united Carcassonne players in a fun and friendly but fiercely competitive environment, and was exactly what so many of us needed without knowing that we needed it. But their job has never been an easy one, and as hard as they've always worked to expand and improve things for the next competition, there's always someone to complain about some aspect of what they're doing or to question why they're doing it. It's a shame that this is what they have to face, but thankfully the majority of the international community is very grateful to them for everything they've done and continue to do for the Carcassonne universe. Great guys.
Tell us, who are your closest friends in Carcassonne? Someone special, someone unforgettable, and daily friends on BGA or UK Board Games Association? I don't know.
Oh god, there are so many names I feel like I should mention, as I've met some truly awesome people over the years I've been involved in Carcassonne, and so many people have helped me, but I'll try to keep it short, otherwise we could be here for a long time. The first 3 people I invited to join the UK Carcassonne team are all people I'd met at the UK Carcassonne Championships and include 2-time champion Richard Goff, 3-time champion Vengi Lim, and 2018 champion Jack Fowler. Vengi beat me in the final in 2019, but somehow I've forgiven him and we've enjoyed a lot of great games together. I've learnt much from all 3 of them, and catching up with these guys every year is a good enough reason to attend the UK Games Expo by itself. In terms of Carcassonne Central, it's fair to say that dozens of friends have come and gone over the decade or so that I've been involved with it, so I feel especially lucky to still be in touch with the ones who have stuck around. These include my friends Rich Fisher, Rich Golds, with whom I've always got at least 2 or 3 games of something in progress on BGA, Crazy Hector, of course, and Willem and his Carcassonne Museum. Of all these people, the one person who I've known longest and who has always helped me with whatever Carcassonne task I've been trying to achieve is Tom Decker. We've been friends since 2015 and we work well together as we understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. We find something to laugh about most days, share an unhealthy obsession for McDonald's, and have had some great adventures together. I'm sure there will be plenty more to come too.
Have you ever visited the Museum of Carcassonne, or William's house, I mean? Because it must be really crazy.
I haven't yet, but I'm considering dressing up as a meeple and hanging around near his house to see if he collects me. Seriously though, I think it's great, and I always enjoy seeing his posts on Instagram, even if I don't fully understand why the latest thing he's added to his museum is any different to something he already owns. But something I've learnt about collecting Carcassonne is that everyone has their own unique definition of what they need to be complete. Willem's idea of being complete is perhaps more extreme than most. I worry sometimes that maybe he'll get to the point where he feels that he needs to own every Carcassonne tile in the world and won't stop until he's collected them all. So watch out.
The Cubasong and the other Chris Wallace inventions are another madness, isn't it?
Absolutely, but there are so many different avenues to explore with Carcassonne that you can always find madness if you follow one of them for long enough. Chris is a very smart, creative guy, and he loves to fiddle with different machines and techniques, so his creations never surprise me or fail to inspire my amazement. Cubasong is a wonderful game that works really well and is fun to play, but he was showing off a new project of his named Tricasson at the UK Championships earlier this year, which a lot of people came to see. This involves triangular tiles being placed on a 20-sided 3D object, like a giant 20-sided dice, with space for 4 tiles on each face, and it was mind-blowing just to watch it being played.
Yes, I've seen it too. I'm a follower of his YouTube channel. Now tell us about Steve D and the Book of Carcassonne.
So Steve is someone who had written a few board game books in the past that had done quite well. He wanted to write a strategy guide about Carcassonne, but needed somebody with a little more experience of the game to write it with him. He contacted me via Carcassonne Central in 2019, and I immediately said yes, as it allowed me to combine 2 things I love, Carcassonne and writing. One of the problems we faced early on was deciding exactly who we were writing the book for, and consequently how advanced the strategy should be. More advanced players might expect more advanced strategy, but we reasoned that the majority of readers would probably be less experienced players, so we tried to keep it fairly simple while still being a fun read for everyone. It was very much our goal to create something that was both helpful and enjoyable for the majority of people who read it, and I'm proud to think we achieved that.
I know you are writing a book of advanced strategy about Carcassonne. Far from telling us details about its content, I would like to know what is the approach to bring to the public a higher level of depth than the previous book.
This isn't really an active project for me at the moment, as I've been too busy with other things, but I would love to write a follow-up to the Book of Carcassonne, either with Steve again or with anyone else who felt they had something to contribute to it. It's difficult though, as more advanced strategy is highly situational. By this I mean that it's typical to look at a specific situation and advise on what is your best option considering the tile you have in hand and what tiles might be left to place. This is the format used by some of the more recent strategy books in Japan. The number of situations you could review in a book would be limited by the size and length of the book, so selecting which situations to discuss would be critical. The other challenge would be to ensure that the book would be fun to read. Even if it could effectively communicate all the most useful elements of the advanced strategy, the number of people who would buy the book would be very restricted if it wasn't also an interesting read for them. And while writing a book like this shouldn't be purely about money and number of sales, it's a lot of effort to go to if only a small handful of people buy it.
Do you like more online battles or face-to-face duels?
I think both ways of playing have their own advantages and disadvantages. If I have time, I prefer to play in person at a table with real tiles, but this takes longer and requires an opponent to be there in person to play against, so I understand why so many people prefer to play online. Online is good because you can log on to BGA and usually get a game within a minute or so, or arrange to play against others in different countries' time zones who you wouldn't ever be likely to play in person under normal circumstances.
What do you think about Board Game Arena?
BGA was much smaller when I joined at the start of 2018, so it's been great to see how much it's grown since then, especially during the COVID years when it became a lifeline for so many people. It's always been very stable and seems to have new games arriving all the time, so it's no surprise that it continues to grow. Some people don't like having to pay for a premium membership, but even so, this seems cheap compared to the price of most board games nowadays. Overall, it's somewhere I visit daily, and I've loved discovering new games there that I've since played hundreds of times and have even gone on to buy physical copies so I can play with my family in some cases.
What has been your highest elo level on BGA?
Ooh, I had to go and look this up on BGA, which feels like it should be much easier to do than it really is. But I think it's 667, which I reached on the 21st of October 2021 after the first game of a duel against Djubjik of Ukraine. I try not to take my elo too seriously, as it can change quite rapidly as a result of many factors and isn't necessarily a direct link to how good I am or aren't as a player in a game where some amount of luck will always be a factor. That said, I'd still love to reach 700 someday, but it's a bumpy road to get there and it seems to get harder every day.
What do you think about the difference between competitive Carcassonne face-to-face and online battles?
I talked about it a little bit earlier, but from my perspective the main difference is that when people are playing online they can hide behind their computer screen and consequently feel safe to cheat or engage in dishonest practices which they wouldn't be able to do if they were playing face to face. I like to win, of course, but my goal is always to improve for the next UK Championship, which is almost always held in person. So I don't want to do anything during online play that I come to rely on if I can't do it during an in-person game, even if it's considered acceptable to do it online. If I lose to my opponent or to the tiles, I can accept it as long as I know the game was played fairly, but this reminds me of the other difference I've noticed, which is that people are often much more friendly when you play them in person and can generally accept defeat and congratulate you on your win. Whereas it isn't uncommon to be insulted by angry losers on BGA who will claim that you only won because you were lucky. Sometimes this is true, of course, but certain players will say the same things every time they lose, and we have a whole channel on our UK team Discord devoted to sharing these types of messages and shaming the players who send them.
Let's talk about Essen, Hans Gluck and Klaus-Jürgen Wrede. You met the author of the game personally and contacted him for several times. He always goes to Carcassonne events around the world. It seems that the success of the game has not changed the fact that Klaus-Jürgen remains a humble person. What do you think about that?
I have a few stories I could tell about Klaus-Jürgen, but my favourite comes from the first time I met him in 2016 at a Carcassonne fan meeting in Essen. Almost a year earlier, I'd started an initiative at Carcassonne Central where I asked people to sign their name on a Carcassonne tile and send it to me. After 4 or 5 months, I had collected enough tiles to make a Carcassonne landscape, which measured 15 by 10 tiles. I stuck all the tiles together on a sheet of cardboard and framed it, wrapped it up and took it to present to Klaus-Jürgen on behalf of Carcassonne Central and his many fans around the world. He loved it and has it on the wall somewhere in his house. But anyway, I mention this as my main reason for presenting him with the landscape of tiles signed for him is that he is never too busy to sign tiles for other people. He must have signed thousands and thousands of tiles since Carcassonne became such a popular and well-known game, so it would be easy to imagine that he might have grown tired of his status or of the many fans of his games over these last 20 years. But it's not the case at all. He always has time for everyone and is never too busy to sit and spend time with those who want to meet him. When I met him at the World Championships last year, the last thing he did before we said goodbye was to come and ask me if there was anything else my friends and I wanted from him before he left. And I told him that the only thing I wanted was for him to sit down and relax for 5 minutes, as he had spent the whole day running around between meetings or talking with his fans. And as someone who values kindness greatly, I can honestly say that he seems one of the kindest and most humble people I've ever met, despite his incredible success. Such a great guy, and a very talented musician too.
Tell me something good about Hamsing Glück and something not so good.
Oh, that is a really difficult question to answer, because my feelings about how hard HIG have worked to support Carcassonne and keep it alive for so long are difficult to put into words. Carcassonne is a game for everyone, everywhere. Every day someone new to Carcassonne plays it for the first time, and someone else plays it for the 1,000th or 10,000th time. Someone plays it at home with their partner or children, and someone else competes in a national or international tournament. Someone sits up to play at a table, and someone else plays it on a computer or on their phone. And after more than 20 years, it's a modern classic and a gateway game that has inspired a global fan community with thousands of active members who are united by little more than their love of the game and their willingness to help it grow. None of this has happened by accident, but because it's such a great game that appeals to so many, it's easy to forget about how HIG are behind it every step of the way, making the decisions that keep the game alive and keep it seeming as fresh and popular as something that just turned up on Kickstarter, but which will be forgotten about within a year. That they can continue to do this, considering how much the industry has changed and how competitive it has become, is nothing short of incredible for a relatively small company to achieve, and I am eternally grateful to them, and Klaus-Jürgen as well, of course, for their efforts. In terms of things that aren't so good, it's hard to say. I think there are certain actions I'd love to see from HIG, but at the same time it's easy to forget that they're small and have other games to support too. However, Carcassonne has such a huge following now that I feel more collaboration between HIG and Carcassonne's fan community could make everyone's lives easier and lead to some really great initiatives. But such collaborations are not something they're keen to become involved in at the moment, although some progress is gradually being made. Oh, and if I'm allowed a second good point, I'd just like to add that I always enjoy HIG's sense of humour and their April Fool's jokes too. I always look forward to finding out what they're going to do each year.
What does Essen mean to you?
I love Essen, and I've had a great time there both times I've visited, but it's kind of overwhelming too. There's so much to see and do and buy that it can feel a lot like you're not making the most out of it unless you're constantly rushing around demoing games and picking up new releases or exclusive promos before they run out. So it's not very relaxing in that respect, and you need to make a plan in advance to make sure you don't forget anything you wanted to see. That said, the atmosphere is incredible, and it's always a good opportunity to meet my Carcassonne friends and to spend time with them, even if I will only be a visitor at the World Championships.
Are you going again this year 2023 as a visitor?
Not this year, unfortunately. I visited last year and before that in 2016, but I don't like to leave Becky and my kids at home while I go away, so I've not visited very often. Plus, I know that if I visit again, I'll come home with hundreds of new games and won't have anywhere to put them all. So I'm doing my best to control myself for now.
When will Chard be the UK champion?
As soon as everyone else stops beating me. Seriously though, I would absolutely love to win the title one year and have come close a couple of times, having reached the final in 2019 and the semi-finals in 2015, 2018 and again this year. So I'm consistently doing well, just not quite well enough. I have a post-it note on the wall of my office at home that says, "Your year will come." I believe it will happen one year when the Carcassonne gods are smiling on me, but I don't know when this will be. Of course, it doesn't help that the UK Championships are now more competitive than ever, with so many top UK players competing every year, as well as Alexei, of course. So I'll answer your question by saying what I say to myself every year. Maybe next year. I'll keep trying.
Tell us something about the UK Championship and the current champion Matt Tucker, stat Matt on BGA.
COVID prevented us from having an in-person UK Championship in 2020, so the organisers of the UK Games Expo made the unusual decision that whoever won the online MSO Championship would represent the UK at the 2021 World Championships, even though the MSO Championship had no entry restrictions and certainly wasn't limited to UK players only. This is why Bogdan Kirkan, brother of 2019 World Champion Marian Kirkan of Romania, played for the UK at the 2021 World Championships. But despite most of the UK team participating in the MSO Championship, Matt was the highest ranked UK player, so I quickly recruited him onto the team after seeing his success, and he quickly became a huge asset to the team. We like to tease Matt for being our slowest player during online tournaments, but he's also proved himself very capable of managing his time effectively during in-person games, so I'm confident this won't be a problem for him at the World Championships. He's a very strong player and deserves to do well, especially after facing Alexei in the UK Championships this year not once but twice. The result of their first game during the Swiss stage of the championship was a tie, but they were drawn against each other again in the semi-final, where Matt won, of course. I can't wait to find out how he gets on in Essen this year, or whether he will end up playing against Alexei yet again at the World Championships this time.
This year, the Spanish champion has not been the one who is considered the best player in our country. In fact, he is a good level player, but he doesn't stand out among the elite players of Carcassonne Spain. I think that whoever wins this kind of competition has to meet several requirements. Have a certain skill and ability in the game, obviously, also have a bit of luck on their side, but I think the most important thing is to be 100% focused and have enough self-confidence to face a tournament with guarantees of success. You have to have everything on your side in this respect. If you wake up thinking that you can't or you won't do it, don't keep your eye on the board. You won't win the game, nor if you don't understand what is happening in the game landscape. But if you are very unlucky, you have nothing to do either, because there are situations where we can nothing to do if everything goes against you and your opponent gets absolutely everything he needs. The game is doomed.
I completely agree with you 100%. I think you've touched on two different aspects to Carcassonne, which are psychology and luck, both of which are very important factors at every level of the game. I've discovered the role that psychology plays as I've started to play more competitively, and have experienced for myself what a difference a positive or negative attitude can make, both during online and also in-person games. It's actually quite difficult to put a loss behind you and move on without letting it affect your next game, so I find it as important as it is helpful to fully review my losses and the decisions I made that might have contributed to them before moving on to my next game. Otherwise I fall into the trap of feeling that I only lost because I was unlucky, and that idea of bad luck can hang around and influence how your next game goes if you let it. I'll usually decide to have a break if I get 2 losses in a row, and might play again when I'm feeling refreshed, as my elo can suffer immensely if I don't. There are other aspects to it as well, of course, like being able to remain calm under pressure and finding ways to turn things around in situations that might seem hopeless. A lot of the great players seem able to do this at times when I would lose hope too easily, so I still have a lot to learn there. The other point is about luck in general and the overall helplessness that you can feel in games where you struggle to draw any useful tiles and can only sit back and watch as your opponent continues to build their lead despite your best efforts to stop them. These are the kind of horrible games that make me regret my 32nd birthday and ever discovering Carcassonne in the first place. But as difficult as these can be to accept, it's just how the game goes sometimes, and every Carcassonne player has experienced it from both sides. It's not about the loss itself, but how you deal with it and move on that matters. This is what gives the great players their greatness. Finally, it's a small and perhaps a silly point, but I will never wish my opponents good luck, either online or offline. This doesn't mean I wish them bad luck, of course, but I believe in meaning what I say, and wishing good luck to someone else is the same as wishing bad luck to myself. Instead, I always wish my opponent an enjoyable game, as I always hope that this will be the case, regardless of the outcome. And I wish your Spanish champion every success at the World Championships, unless he plays Matt, of course.
Now, on a more personal note, I'd like you to tell us something we don't know about Chard.
Well, Dan is 30 is always so busy that there's not a lot of time left for Dan Chard, so it's hard to think. Compared to most, I don't consider myself a serious board gamer in terms of the number of different games I own and play, but I am very interested in game design and have been developing a few ideas of my own which I hope might eventually turn into something playable. I'm not great at the artistic side, but I love the creativity and the process of trying to represent the thrill and chaos of certain situations or events using cards, tokens and specific mechanics. Finding fun and interesting ways to implement certain ideas and gameplay elements never fails to excite me, even if the game itself might seem quite simple. Oh, and maybe you already knew this, but my avatar on BGA was designed for me by MeepleSource, and is more than just an avatar. You can buy my danisthirty character meeples through their website, and I originally had 300 of them when it was first created.
If you were to renew your nickname now, you would no longer be danisthirty. You would now be Danis.
It's an interesting question for me, as I never really knew where it would take me when I first used it. Going back to 2010, danisthirty was a nickname I came up with for a blogging project I started on my 30th birthday. I never finished the blog, but I liked the nickname and used it in several places, including Carcassonne Central, where it stuck. My biggest regret about it is that people often read it as danisthirty. Using the number rather than the word might have helped to make it clear that I don't need a drink, but it's quite funny really, and I've had friend requests from BGA accounts with nicknames Dan isn't 30 and Dan is thirsty, which made me laugh. So maybe I'd go with Dan isn't thirsty, unless someone's already taken that too.
Ask me a question. What do you want to know about the Postman of Carcassonne or the POC?
I've heard in your interviews that you like to ask your guests about their favourite expansions, and I know too that you also created your own mini expansion recently. So my question to you is this: what is your favourite expansion for Carcassonne, if any, and what do you think makes the perfect expansion in terms of how the gameplay is changed?
I used to ask for the expansions in Season 1 of Meeple Podcast, but not in this moment. It was the way I used to finally those interviews. Now I usually ask for something my guests want to talk about and I have not asked for. The Postman of Carcassonne, or the Carcassonne Postman, is a fun expansion created with the great and essential collaboration of Hector Madrona, Meepledron in Carcassonne Central. Without him, this expansion was not possible to exist. You can see the rules and the PDF image to print on the specific post it in the Carcassonne Connection blog into my website elcarterodecarcassonne.com. My favorite expansions is the same, what I think is the perfect in terms of how the gameplay is changed, as you have told. It is the Princess and the Dragon, not only because the dragon, not only using the dragon against your opponent, but for recovering my blocked meeples. Also because the fairy point you can get eventually and its protection to my meeples, but above all because the princess tiles are very useful to get some meeples from my opponent out, the features I want for me. There are many different ways to understand this expansion, and it's hated and loved at the same time by the Carcassonne fans. Following with my response before, tell us about something that I haven't asked you, something that you think would be important to this interview.
Well, it's been a very thorough interview, and I can't honestly think of much that you haven't already covered. I could ask myself how I keep myself looking so youthful and handsome, but it might be more relevant to ask myself about Carcassonne Central for the benefit of your listeners who might not have heard of it. So, hey Dan, what's this Carcassonne Central that you keep talking about? Well, that's a good question. Thanks so much for asking it. Carcassonne Central was established in 2008 as a home for Carcassonne's Complete Annotated Rules, which was a document tracking all of Carcassonne's official expansions at the time and how to play all of them together according to the official rules. It grew quickly and soon became Carcassonne's largest fan community. Current membership is over 9,000, with regular discussions about every aspect of Carcassonne on our forums, a huge library of fan-made expansions, tournaments, news, quizzes, competitions, giveaways, and a marketplace. In recent years, Carcassonne Central has also branched out onto Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and has a busy Discord server where the Carcassonne chat continues daily. Personally, I'm incredibly grateful to Carcassonne Central and to those who founded it for all the help and information it's provided me with over the years, and it's been a privilege for me to have become an admin there and then a co-owner, considering the impact it has had on Carcassonne and the role it has played in the Carcassonne universe.
What would you like to hear on the Meeple podcast next?
I've checked your website and am blown away by the number of people you've already interviewed. This does make my decision somewhat more difficult, as you've already spoken to many of the people I would have recommended, but I think it would be awesome to hear about Carcassonne from the perspective of either Moritz Bundhofer or Klaus-Jürgen himself. That'd be incredible.
For me too, I'm expecting the response of Hansing Gluck for an interview, but the time is passing and nobody have answered to me. No problem, I'm going to knock on the door one more time. Klaus-Jürgen interview will be something I want to do one day, at the right time, don't worry. Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure to have you in this channel. I wish you the best of luck, best regards, and see you soon.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks to you for your wonderful podcast too. I wish you good luck and every success with it.
To the listeners, see you in the next episode. Bye bye.
Set me free, come on little girl. All you gotta do is set me free. Can't you see? Come on little girl. All you gotta do is set me free, oh yeah. Look up the skies, all the stars above you. All the stars are saying do, 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 do. Set me free, come on little girl. All you gotta do is set me free, oh yeah. Look up the skies, all the stars above you. All the stars are saying do, 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 do. Set me free, come on little girl. All you gotta do is set me free. All you gotta do is set me